I once again thank the British Council for joining us. We now begin our first invited speakers panel. We are delighted to have four distinguished speakers with us today, in person and online. Dr. Asha Singh was supposed to join us here in person, but she's not doing well, so she has joined us online most probably. I request our distinguished speakers and our moderators for this session to please take their places. We have with us here Professor Shipra Mukherjee from West Bengal State University and Dr. Hiya Shen from Presidency University. The session will be moderated by Professor Himadri Lahiri. So, ma'am, please take your places. I request my colleague Krishna Shinjini Dev, Junior Research Fellow ILSR, to please formally greet our guests. Thank you, Shinjini. Our two other speakers have joined us online. We are delighted to have all the distinguished speakers with us today. I request all the speakers to please speak for 20 minutes, and which will be followed by a question answer session at the end of the panel. I request the session moderator, Professor Himadri Lahiri, to kindly take over and introduce the speakers. So the floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to chair this session in which there will be four speakers, and they'll be talking about very, very interesting topics, and we'll be waiting for their arguments. We'll listen to their arguments, and at the end of the session, we'll respond, we'll ask questions, comments. Each speaker, as has been already stated, will have 20 minutes per presentation. The first speaker, I will won't waste time right now. I would go straight to the speakers. And the first speaker is Hiya Shen, who is an assistant professor at the Department of Sociology, Presidency University, Kolkata. She works primarily on cultural formations around children. A doctoral research on how ideas about childhood translated into experiences of children from middle-class backgrounds was published as a monograph, Time Out in the Land of Opu, Childhoods, Buildings from a Moratorium, and the Middle Classes of Urban West Bengal by Springer in 2013. Her work in the last few years has been on the children's theatre scene in India, as well as the traces of Indian children in the archives of Anglican missionary societies. Her recent project that was funded by the Indian Council of Social Sciences. That was founded by the Indian Council of Social Science Research, explores child-centric participatory media enterprises in India from the 1940s to the late 1960s. A key concern of her work is to see how research focusing on children might converse with other subfields in sociology and history. Over to you. Please give your title.
So, good afternoon to all of you. It's a privilege to be here and to be able to share my work with you, but also to learn from you. And thank you very much to ILSR and the organizers of this conclave for giving me this opportunity. So, the title...
Just 1 minute, ma'am.
Yeah.
Presentation.
So it can come. I can keep speaking. It's not a problem, yeah. So the title doesn't seem entirely congruent with the title of the conference, the conclave, but I will explain as I go along. It's called "Calling All Children: Some Reflections Around a Children's Sphere, 1940 to 1950s." So this lecture anatomizes a project that had started out with exploring a media phenomenon from almost 80 years ago. A phenomenon that involved children of different ages, some of the youngest being about 5 years old. Reflecting on the processes that this research entailed, but also the practices which inform research on children in South Asia, I attempt to converse with some of the thrusts of this conclave, especially the question of what kind of analytical templates one might offer South Asia scholarship, especially scholarship from South Asia. So the beginnings of my interest in tracing children's presence in archives comes from a very long association with childhood studies, but also a simultaneous sense of incongruence with it. A source of dislocation for me in particular was the fact that I thought there was a difference in circumstance between scholars in the global north and scholars like me, or me. And the difference in circumstance was that when childhood studies, CS, was, or in children's history, northern scholars were articulating their anxieties around mediation of children's voices. But the grouse was in the archives, you don't just hear the child speaking, but it's intermingled with others. Or there were so many discussions about moving past positivist methodologies, developing strategies like reading against the archival grain. I, for my part, I could not connect with this discussion at all. Not because I didn't want to read against the archival grain, but I didn't know what kind of appropriate archives there were in South Asia, which allowed me to find traces of children. And voices of children was, far cry. So I come back to this question of difference, and this is what my lecture is going to be about primarily. And difference poses a very uneasy issue in both disciplines I am connected with, sociology as well as childhood studies. So in Indian sociology or South Asian sociology, as you're well aware, there have been, of course, debates about decolonial thinking for a long time, but there have also been anxieties around indigenous sovereign sociologies. Right? So from the 1960s, when sociologists here were trying to retaliate against the American model, a lot of sociologists today are also accused of overplaying difference by talking about how our context is circumscribed within a national social, which is very different. In childhood studies, difference poses a different problem. So in the 1990s, childhood studies, again, was very white, very northern, and it started out with saying we welcome plural voices. At the same time, these plural voices did nothing to render its basic knowledge framework precarious. So it was quite indifferent to multiplicity in a certain sense. So while scholars of the North are accused of geopolitical insularity, scholarship from the South must always be especially careful, it seems, that we do not overplay our difference, that we do not show the South as a site of difference which either affirms or opposes hegemonic knowledge models, but does not really, shake them. So falling back on the processes which make up this work, I reflect on the wariness with which scholarship from South Asia proceeds, despite and to a great extent because of these debates and the recent calls for recognizing and dismantling coloniality in knowledge practices. So I for one, am always anxious. Am I decolonial enough? Do I have to talk about decoloniality all the time? And so on and so forth. So I probably speak more to my anxieties, and I hope to speak to yours as well through this. So talking about an evolving heuristic of this research is also for me a means to think through uncomfortable methodological conceptual questions, but also a means for me to show how I relate to other scholarship, both from South Asia and otherwise. My reflections around what I call here a children's sphere, it's organized around this freighted idea of difference that accompanies research on children in South Asia. I shall return to the question at the end of this lecture. I've sort of conceptualized it in two parts. In the first, I talk about how I did, how I do, so methodological concerns, anxieties. In the second part, I talk about how I thought of my data and chose to enframe it. You could have the next slide and then move on to the next slide, not a problem. So the media phenomenon that I speak of, I actually started out with being interested in what kind of children's voices I might find in media archives in India. So I started with the 1940s, and we can move on to the next. Yeah, this is fine. And so there are two components of this media phenomenon that I see. There's a radio component and there's a print component. And the key year seems to be 1940. This is when a lot of newspapers start introducing children's pages brought out on a weekly basis. And these are nothing like children's magazines, although developed from that model. Also, AIR Kolkata produces one new children's program, Shishu Mahal, and redesigns, reimagines an already existing children's program from the 20s, Golpo Dadur Ashur. So here I primarily focus on these three newspapers. Statesman had a page called For the Children, later known as Playtime. Anandabajar Potrika had Anandamala, started in 1940, as a page. I mean, you might be familiar with the magazine now. And Jugandhar had Chotoder Pattari, right, brought out on Tuesdays. And here are these two children's programs. So both kinds of enterprises, print and radio, attracted overwhelming response at that time, and they enjoyed great popularity, but not just among children. They garnered public attention until, and continued to garner public attention until the end of the 1960s. So as like a lot of scholars start out probably in the South, you read works and you're animated by them, you're animated about you read about people working in the BBC archives, for example, and you have something in mind. But at the same time, we in this house, we are also always equipped to deal with things not quite working out the way it does in the scholarship that we engage with. So as my work progressed, right from the start, I had to improvise and develop alternatives. Sources at the Akashvani archives appeared at first to be quite challenging as a means to sync with. They were really sparse. This was the first difficulty. A lot of the tapes had been taped over. They were the existing surviving digital audio clips were often undated. You could not recognize voices. So I wasn't, and there were questions of access as well. I will not go into that. So I pivoted from one kind of archive to another. Newspaper offices had something to offer me, but these were also public archives, the newspapers themselves. And I was aware that both Akashvani as well as all three children's pages invited letters from children. But I tried locating them, I could not. I was told that all media houses systematically disposed of children's letters once they were done with. So anyway, so when I fall back on the public archives, and I was not too happy in the beginning because it didn't seem like the real thing, like archive enough, like a hardened archive with memos, circulars, letters. Anyway, I started thinking about it from the lens of my discipline, sociology, and I used a very basic coding schema to see what the most interactive features of these pages were. You can move to the next slide. Yeah? So, many ways in which children were allowed to interact. One was they could send in writing, stories, poems, and so on. The other two interactive features, which I focus on here, is the post-back feature, which is where children write letters. But here also I can't hear the children's voices directly. I have to access them through editorial replies. And the other interactive section is the editor's letter to the readers, where sometimes he mentions correspondence with particular children. You can show the next slide. And after every 1 minute, you can keep changing, not a problem. So you have to click on it, I think, for it to show. So very soon, by 41, all the pages have been established, and by 43, the trouble starts with the participatory genre. Children are sending in poems and short stories, a lot of stories with war in the background because this is wartime. But there's soon accusations of plagiarism, and this is a huge problem. It's okay, you can move on to the next if this doesn't show. Not a problem. With the letters from children, I wish I could have shown you the letters, but since they're not visible now, this is a bit of a problem. With the letters, the problem was that the editors seemed to favor intellectual questions from children more than anything else. And this was a big problem. So children were asking really intellectual questions, a certain kind of children, like ইশপের গল্প কি সত্যি ইশপ লিখেছেন না ব্রাবিউস লিখেছেন, and so on and so forth. The problem with this was this conflicts directly with the page's initial editorial vision of being democratic, of not being like the elite children's magazines, right? But not all children can respond or react to this participatory genre in quite the same way. The second is, this also is very labor intensive on the part of the editorial staff. I mean, imagine having to work at finding the answers to all these questions children are asking. So if you can go back to see if those slides work. If not, then, well. So very soon there is reader discontent because children want to see their names in print. And they're resorting to different strategies. So this is something I see a lot of girls doing, especially from Rajshahi and Alipurduar. They accuse the editor of discrimination based on geographies. And so the editor is then provoked to answer and say, Ami erokom noi, erokom bhabbe na, and so on and so forth. Sometimes they also resort to other strategies, like 3 or 4 siblings band together and send 50 letters, bombarding the newspaper office in the hope that at least 2 of them would get published. So very soon, this very affordance of this participatory genre threatens the stability of the pages itself. So I use a coding schema to see how the features are changing. So from 1946, the postback section grows infrequent, to the point that sometimes there are whole 2 months go by and the postback section doesn't appear at all. Chichi tholi ba tomader chichi. You also see less of subscriber contributions, which anyway were supposed to be not written by children themselves. Another thing happens by 46. All 3 pages had established their own clubs. If you could, maybe I'll do it later. So Statesman had Benji League, Anandamala had Monimala, and Chotoder Pattari had Shoppechi Rashur, which I'm going to refer to henceforth as SPA. So all of them kind of established clubs, and these clubs had branches across districts, even outside of Bengal, and more or less they had the same model. Subscribers could join, subscribers to the pages could become members, and they differed in their degree of decentralization. So for example, for Jugantar, Shoppechi Rashur is the most centralized. What also happens by 46 is a new kind of feature takes precedence. In place of চিঠির থলি, you start having সংগঠনের খবর বা আসরের খবর. So based on my reading of these pages and based on my coding schema, I see the two as connected: the changing features and the rise of an associational culture through media. Yeah, and I see both of them as emerging from the initial affordances of the participatory genre. And whatever nationalist ambitions the editors might have had about the clubs at the beginning, the clubs ultimately became means by which the editors could mitigate tensions arising from children's desire to participate and being turned down. And by staging the clubs as a sort of living component of the page itself, by which readers could be connected with, and see public figures and be seen, the children's pages retain their participatory spirit, but they no longer require children to speak or write. Yeah. So I was trying to mine data from the pages, like I would in a regular sociological project, so to speak. I was trying to do internet searches and connect with readers, but it did not really work out. So this is where I come to my second mode of pivoting. What did work was both clubs connected with the Bengali pages, they continue to exist. They are now registered as societies, and they have a social media presence, a considerable social media presence. So I contacted one of the clubs, Shoppechi Rashur, and I was invited to their headquarters at Adushapulli for an event. And the day I went there, it was a teacher training workshop. A lot of former members, club members, had come to meet each other, and they were men in their 70s and early 80s. And they had come from a great distance just to meet other Shoppechi Rashur members, and there were no children in sight. So when hearing them speak collectively, I was simultaneously also doing individual interviews with participants from the 40s and 50s. But at the Shoppechi Rashur event, when they were speaking collectively and recollecting together, it allowed me to understand something which work on the public archives could not show me. And that was that in the the peak of the associational moment, the clubs were still tethered very much to the newspapers. In fact, a lot of young people had this sense of being connected with mainstream media, and they were using it to visit celebrities, write letters, or saying, "Ami Jugantar theke aschi," and so on and so forth. So using the media house name in a certain sense. Plus, so for example, one respondent tells me that they were from the Chadda Shoppechi Rashur in the late 40s, and they say that একদিন ব্রতচারী হতো, একদিন fancy drill, but Tuesdays when the page was published, the club would selectively sit and read the paper. For those of you who know, Chatta also had a refugee, it housed a refugee colony at that point of time. And this kind of club intervention meant individuals need not have newspaper subscriptions. Club subscriptions could work for children. The other thing which happens with the clubs sort of gaining prominence, inviting mayors, inviting ministers, the editors who had initially kept an air of secrecy about who they were, what they looked like, they suddenly started inviting children to the media houses. And they were also making public appearances at children's events. And these were crowd pullers. So for example, Akhil Nyogi, who's known as Shapun Buro, you can keep looking at some of these 5 minutes. I really have to run through this. So quickly about the radio part. So interacting with AIR is relatively simple, happens in two ways, in-studio recordings or letters. And in-studio recordings limits the participatory potential of children because of the medium itself. But Indiradi, for example, finds a way of absorbing it, which is why children speak in a chorus at Shishu Mahal. There are also other ways in which, as I was moving to the public archives, it seems that Kolkata Rashur had a means of constantly rehearsing children's plays which could not be seen within the Akashbani Bhavan premises. What I wanted to do through this is, by 1949, I see an intermediate network coming into being, a network which we in sociology would call a heterophilous network, like weak ties bring diverse people together, interspersed with very strong homophilous ties based around club activities. And a lot of people are joining the fray. It's not just children themselves, which is my larger point. What I wanted to primarily sort of drive home is what calls all children ultimately is this network. And I make sense of this network, although I started out with a very different question, through this constant pivoting and engaging with other kinds of scholarship on fandom cultures, on film history from South India, from political sociology. There's not time to talk about it. See how rude the editors are. So anyway, in recent years, many South Asia scholars have found it very productive to think about archival absence in the context of their research. And they have worked such thinking right into their heuristic. So for example, Rakesh Sengupta's fantastic work on media archaeology, he talks about how in the West everyone is obsessing about screenwriting archives. And in Bengal, he can barely find screenwriting scripts of a certain kind in the 1930s. So he works it right into how the kind of epistemic violence, conventional, knowledge practices of disciplines like media archaeology inflict on us. And it is what I'm telling you is not novel because it is something which South Asia scholars are already always positioned to do. What I'm trying to say is by working the pivoting, by working the questions of what was not there, what I had to think around, I'm trying to manage difference in my work. I'm trying to, instead of talking about archival apathy or archival lack, which plays right into the difference game of the South, I'm trying to work it into my heuristic. And doing this, thinking about why there is lack or why I cannot proceed the way someone else proceeds located elsewhere, also allows me to understand media infrastructures, media ecologies of the past and the present, which ensure their survival. With regard to the analytical part, since I don't really have time to talk about it to a great extent, but I've tried to think with other scholarships. And I have also tried to think of my relationship which I foster with other subfields like media archaeology, like fandom studies, which are very, in a certain sense, if you look at fandom scholarship from the North, it starts with Star Trek and Harry Potter. It is only when scholarship from the South talks about Telugu cinema and how fandoms play right into populist regimes, is it possible to directly connect? But I think it is also imperative that we connect with those subfields which do not have the same kind of anxieties that we do, that do not sometimes bother about the coloniality of their episteme. Because we're positioned in a way to explore the affordances of these subfields, subgenres. So, I will be very brief. As I engaged with this kind of scholarship, it made me see this moment and it made me see this intermediate children's sphere. I see aspects of fandom in it. So to say it very briefly, by the 50s, this is no longer about children themselves. So in fact, Bimal Ghosh Momachi writes a letter to Mahatma Gandhi, and it's almost like a fan letter, saying, I write for children, please read my works if you learn Bengali ever. Akhil Neogi, Shapun Buro, in his memoirs says he goes to film actor Chobi Bishwas's house and says, একদিন আসুন না আমাদের ওখানে, ছেলেদের জন্য কিছু করবেন. My engagement with these varied subfields, not only in terms of their conceptualizations of people's relationship with media, but their differing methodological frameworks and their larger implication about knowledge practices, has also informed my navigation around questions of nationalist agenda or pedagogic objectives. Questions which have a very vexed history where studying children is concerned, because they tend to engulf the voices. And this engagement has allowed me, this relationship with other kinds of subfields, has allowed me to navigate my way around difference at certain points, allowing me to even be unmindful of difference at certain moments. This fear, as I call it, was not exclusively dependent on children's voice as much as the spectacle they afforded. And by the 1950s, the orchestrators of these initiatives joined in the fray themselves, redesigning events and cultures as a means to involve a greater number of public figures and celebrities, not so much children at a point.
Sorry for interrupting.
Last line. The children's sphere was charged with a certain determination to introduce children of Bengal and India with the national social, and also introduce the national social to children. But based on my evolving heuristic, in the years immediately after independence, this intermediate sphere begins to look more like an ever-widening, really committed fan culture. Thank you very much.
Thanks. I'm really sorry that this could have gone on. Such an interesting topic, it actually took me back to my time. It is nostalgia. Most of you probably don't have access to those times, but I had to a certain extent from 60s onwards. Golpo Dadur Ashor was a reality. So Momachi was a figure that we admired. So the presentation actually took me to to those old days where we were participant. People of our generation were actually participants. So from that view, it's interesting that from the vantage point of the present time, Dr. Shen has gone back to the time, and it is not that easy. You must go through the archival method, archival passageway, and as she rightly pointed out, starting a kind of research from her own point of view, from her own location in the South, global South, was not at all very easy. It entailed some kind of anxiety, and that has been wonderfully expressed, and in the perspectives of the children. That is a very interesting point of time. You can talk on that and respond to that point when we will face the questions. Thank you very much.